We've got 1.2 million charitable nonprofits, and there are many other nonprofits that are not considered charitable nonprofits. They're still tax-exempt organizations. So our sector is huge. Our sector makes an enormous impact on all of our communities. The irony is that our federal government can tell us how many heads of lettuce we pulled out of the ground last year, but our federal government cannot tell us how many people work for nonprofits. Pretty amazing. It's because the federal government tracks through Bureau of Labor Statistics. We track through a lot of different silos, perhaps different federal agencies, but they're not necessarily talking to one another. So that's just one example, a very practical example for nonprofits, for the types of issues at the policy level that the National Council of Nonprofits is working towards. There's a piece of federal legislation that was introduced last year that we'll see where it goes. It's a nonpartisan. It's actually not even revenue. It doesn't have any revenue impact, so it won't be caught up, hopefully, in the budget deficit challenging discussions. And it's called the Nonprofit Sector and Community Solutions Act. And you probably haven't heard of it, and that's okay. But the goal of it is to try to get federal agencies to talk together and share data and become more efficient in how the federal government funds, usually through states, nonprofits. And what's happening in states around the country? Do they have a lot of money now? No. Huge budget deficits in the states. So this is one of the trends that is impacting nonprofits very, very significantly. But before I go there, I want to just do some inward-looking trends. So you all need to know that a hallmark and a really essential challenge, and also a terrific framework for nonprofits, is the focus on accountability and transparency. So when George was talking about starting a nonprofit, talking about a board of directors, the need for a board, hopefully more than 3 people, all the legal framework, yes, there are lots of legal hoops you have to jump through. But what makes a nonprofit different from the private small business down the street is that board of directors, and the fact that no one person owns a nonprofit, right? A nonprofit is started for the public's benefit. So there is a tremendous sense in the public that donates money, and through the government that also gives quite a bit of funding. Almost a third of funding for all nonprofits comes from government. There is a sense that nonprofits need to be accountable and transparent about where the money goes. So on the National Council's website, if you ever want to visit us, you can just hover your little mouse over resources. And not only is there an article on how to start a nonprofit, but there's also tons and tons of resources under the topical resources. And one of the ones that I wanted to mention, if you go down to fundraising, another thing that George and also Pat mentioned, sometimes people who are starting a nonprofit are just really focused on having their own idea, and they think, gosh, this is such a unique niche, I want to start a nonprofit. Chances are there's someone else doing something similar at least, and maybe that organization already has their 501c3 status. And so I put my mouse over something called fiscal sponsorship. It's just something to keep in the back of your mind. If you're not sure you want to start a nonprofit, perhaps you can find a partner who will be your fiscal sponsor, meaning that they've already gotten their tax-exempt status from the IRS, and your program can be run under their program, and you can still have some autonomy, and you can still have relationships with donors, but you would do it under the auspices of a more mature organization, let's say, one that can provide you some guidance as well as can provide you with some of the heavy lifting in terms of reporting to the government the financial situation of your organization, which is so critically important, and also acknowledging back gifts to donors, which is a very important part of this transparency and building the donors' trust. So there are lots of resources on the National Council's website, as well as on Venable's website, and certainly on the DC offices. Pat, I'm going to flub the name of your agency. the Office of Partnership and Grant Services, which is a new resource that we've all learned about today. So the economy, just a real severe lack of resources, and the state budget deficits are impacting nonprofits. So those of you who are starting nonprofits just need to recognize that funding is essential, and there's great competition for it, and that's why starting another nonprofit may not be the best business model at this point in time. So think about partnering with existing nonprofits and other ways to form collaborations that will allow you still to fulfill your mission. And then the third trend that I wanted to mention and try to tie in with Pat's comments is the trend of a blending of the sectors, of the nonprofit and the business sectors. How many of you have heard of the phrase social enterprise? Okay, there's actually a Social Enterprise Alliance, which is a membership organization of folks who are involved in social enterprise. What's a social enterprise? Well, it's an entity, sometimes a for-profit, sometimes a nonprofit, that has a mission that is to promote social good. Sounds like a nonprofit, right? Well, if you form a social enterprise as a for-profit, you can have investors, and you can get dollars flowing to you in a way that is slightly different from asking for private philanthropy to give to you or asking for a grant from the government. So there's a real blending of certain nonprofits that actually form subsidiaries to be social enterprises. So if you think of the traditional nonprofit, the Goodwill, they have the thrift shop. The thrift shop actually fulfills their mission in many ways. It helps with job training. It helps with recycling. I think Goodwill is the largest social enterprise in the United States. And yet we think of it as a traditional nonprofit, but it's actually innovative and cool. And so this blending and sometimes confusion about what should I be, what kind of an entity should I be, is where you really need to think through your business plan and try to get some legal assistance if you can to help you with that. And try to look at all the wonderful free resources on various websites as well. So when Pat was talking about collaboration and partnership and capacity building, these are buzz phrases that you'll want to be familiar with, and capacity building goes to the sustainability of your organization over time. You can be a comet, you can be a bright flash in the sky and start out with a wonderful trajectory, but then flame out. So what do you need? You need sustainable systems, sustainable approach to your workforce, thinking about some of the trends that John mentioned about how are we working intergenerationally and also being sensitive to different cultural competencies that we all need to have. And then also, what is your business model to sustain yourself as a nonprofit? You cannot rely just on government grants. You cannot rely on a foundation or two or three. You need to be connecting with the public, building up an individual donor base, because it's those nonprofits that have lots and lots of individual donors. Think public radio. How many of us give $5, $10, whatever? And even public radio has challenges, and that's why they're constantly in a fund drive, the way WAMU is right now, if you listen to that in the morning. So you have to think about business models. So these are, there are lots of resources out there, and I would encourage you to go visit Pat's office and connect also at some point with the resources on the Center for Nonprofit Advancement's website, which is our state association here in DC. And we've given you some links to how to sign up for the newsletter of the National Council of Nonprofits if that's of interest to you. So thank